Right, hi everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of Mind the Gap 2022, where we continue to talk to business and thought leaders, focusing on the gaps we are now facing as HR and business leaders following the pandemic and working on what everyone's talking about is rather boring now, the new normal and what that's going to look like. So I'm Tom Holmes, founding director of Veran Performance, technology agnostic digital transformation consultancy that helps businesses solve their HR and finance problems and bring that digital transformation to the back office. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Pauline Caldwell, who is a strategic and operational global HR director with extensive experience working within professional services environments. And we're going to be talking today about the change in power between employees and employers and what's happening in that dynamic. Because I think, Pauline, you're going to tell us we've seen more change in that dynamic in the last couple of years than ever, and we need to get ready and start understanding it. So I'm really excited about that. So morning, Pauline, how are you? Welcome.
I'm great, thank you, Tom. I'm very well. So morning, everyone. My name is Pauline Caldwell. As Tom said, I'm an HR professional with 20 plus years working in professional services environments. I've operated at the global board level and executive committee level, and I've got a really good kind of feel and understanding for the complexities and the opportunities of working in kind of partnership professional services environments. My most recent employed role was with Clyde & Co. They're a global law firm, and I'm a bit of a lockdown statistic, I would say, of lockdown number 1 in 2020, where I kind of decided to reflect on my career and what I was doing, and made a change and took a year, thought I would take a year out and go traveling, spend it with family, and COVID obviously scuppered that for me. So I decided to set up my own business, Momentum Business Consulting, and I've worked with a variety of clients over this past year, from the legal, accounting, risk, engineering sectors, covering the full range of the HR consulting cycle, change and transformation projects, executive coaching, which is my passion, and also most recently my first non-executive director role as well. So having just celebrated 1 year of working for myself, it brings me to today, and I'm really fortunate to have been connected with the team at Veran and looking forward to our conversation.
Great, thanks, Pauline. It's also your birthday, so happy birthday.
Thank you.
Great. So as business leaders, I guess, to start our conversation, we're all aware of the obvious labour and skill shortages, the increase in inflation and interest rates, and these are all things which are changing this year, including wage escalation, people wanting more flexibility in a different way of working in their life balance. 5 years ago, it was a completely different world, even 3 years ago, where actually labour shortages were talked about but were rare, and this power dynamic has changed a lot.
Yeah.
So is the boot on the other foot, and how are we seeing that power dynamic and shift in employee-employee relationship? Pauline, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, it's the million-dollar question, really, isn't it? And I think that it's a much more interesting dynamic than it's been in a long, long time. We know that there's a lot of talk about the great attrition versus the great attraction, and that's in a recent McKinsey report. I think it was last September, actually, so it's not as recent, but it's still all very relevant. That when we look at it, unemployment has dropped.
I'm not sure whether it's just me who can't hear Pauline or everybody.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now, Tom?
Yes, I can. Okay. Sorry, Pauline.
That's all right, no problem. So, I think I was just saying, unemployment has dropped, the skill shortage has increased, and there's an even greater war for talent. And for me, that balance of power has most definitely shifted into the employees who are taking stock of their careers and deciding, what they want the future to look like. COVID has had a major impact on that, and people are reflecting on their futures. And that's not coming into the office. They don't want to come back to the office and do the normal 9 to 5 in the way that people were expected to pre-pandemic. And they don't, obviously, even when they're reflecting on their careers, they're not all waiting for a new opportunity either. They're prepared to jump before they've even got something to move to. because they are looking for greater flexibility. They're looking for more autonomy in how they work and where they work and what they're actually doing. And if their current employer is not prepared to offer it, people are, making decisions to move elsewhere, because you can be absolutely assured that if you're not doing it, one of your competitors will be offering that flexibility. And I do really think that as HR professionals, we're kind of that lightning rod of sitting between the people and the employer to help the leaders make that mental shift from the traditional ways of working to helping them understand what does it mean in this new hybrid world and this flexible working environment, which is a change for all of us.
But that's very interesting. So do you think this is a long-term change and people's expectations are going to continue? Are we going back to where we were before after a pause, or is this the new world, Pauline?
Well, if I had a crystal ball and I knew what the answer was, I'd patent it and then I'd become very rich and be doing this for the rest of my life. But I don't know. I think time will tell at the moment. Just now it's heightened because people are absolutely wanting that flexibility. They're not prepared to compromise on it. And the newer generations have completely different expectations from those that are normally the primary decision makers, which tends to be, an older age demographic that have just not been used to working in a more flexible way. So for me, it's a bit of a watch this space, but I don't see it going back to the way that it was personally.
Right. And this trend is global, I understand. It's both Europe and US and everywhere else, is it?
Yeah, I mean, for me, so, and as I said, the past year I've been working with a variety of clients, and they've been a mixture of global, they've been a mixture of UK based and also different sizes and shapes as well. And I'm also, really quite connected with my accounting and legal network, and everyone's struggling to understand what it is that they need to do to retain their existing talent, as well as attract the future talent as well. And I don't think any of us have got the complete answer, because there is no one magic bullet that's going to solve all of this. But I think the key thing to take away from it is recognizing that what worked in the past is not necessarily going to carry them into the future. And as I say, generationally, the partners in the professional services firms grew up in a more of the kind of master servant style of leadership, where it was a bit more top down. New generations of employees are expecting completely different leadership style and approach, but also so are our clients. And remember, our clients are also a different generation, so they equally have a different expectation. And I think that power shift and dynamic has always been there, but I think COVID has really given it a good shunt, so that at the moment people are really holding on all the cards. So and I think if we go back to almost just a year ago now, we're coming up to, I think it was the 20th of March, where the changes that we made in 2 weeks to get everybody working from home, that would have taken us 10 years to achieve within professional services firms. And I just don't think we can go back to the old ways. And I think we're seeing the shift to much flatter structures, to a more kind of empathetic type of leadership. And in some cases, one of my clients, actually, a conversation we had last year, was talking to his partner conference about leadership servitude. And that's about them recognizing that they're actually in service, there to service the employees' needs and wants to deliver for the clients. And that's a real, that's a bit of quite of a leap for a professional services environment. And that was I think it was Robert Greenleaf that covered that back in the 60s.
Indeed, and I'm reflecting on that, particularly the master servant and the old partner employee thing, and I'm thinking about legal services as well for a second, only as a kind of microcosm of that. And I was talking both to a partner and one of the new associates in the same firm recently, and it was very interesting, because the partner was incredibly frustrated with the service which the associates seem to now be bringing to the table and their expectations. So the kind of comments, and I'm not going to give any quotes on this, where, look, I just can't get that person to work beyond the normal hours when I need them to. They don't have the same kind of drive where I tell them to do something, and I tell them I want it on a Thursday, and then they might come back and say, well, actually, I was busy on Wednesday night, and so I haven't completed it, and stuff like that. Something which this partner was contrasting as being completely different to their experience as an associate. Equally, talking to one of the associates, they were saying that they felt that they were being, it's kind of like back to school, back to this kind of, and that they, you know, they weren't being heard when they were explaining their needs and desires in a piece of work. Which, of course, you know, feeding that back to the partner, they couldn't even understand it. Why would I care less about their needs and desires with a piece of work? My reflection was, what a disconnect. How there was a complete lack of understanding between the two parties there, and I was wondering how one can bridge that. It wasn't for want of wanting to understand, but there was no understanding, and therefore finding that connection point, I thought must be very hard for both parties.
Incredibly, and I think for me, so naturally, in my idealistic world, I would say, you know, employer has power, employee has power, and then they have a nice little meeting in the middle, and everyone, you know, runs off into the sunset together. I think there's always been some, you know, the market has always been, it's an employer's power balance or an employee's, that there just never has been that total balance in the middle. But one of the things that I've talked to my clients about this past year is talked about recognizing, actually, if you're delivering for your client, your people are your product. You've not got a widget necessarily that you're not got an Apple phone. You've not got, I don't know, some new piece of technology that you're devising and selling that on. It's the intellectual potential or intellectual property of your people. And so for me, that's really about putting the individual at the heart of the conversation. It's about achieving a balance around all of that. So I've used a little model where it's almost like a spoke, you know, wheel, where you've got the individual at the middle, and then you've got the spokes coming off it. So you see you've got the individual here, then you've got the business needs, then you've got maybe the CEO, then the team that the person sits in, you know, other, you know, their family members, their peers, their line manager. And it's about how do we then achieve balance around all of that. And equally, you've got over here looming and looking down over the top of you is what your competitors are doing as well. So I've asked my clients to say, okay, well, why don't we use that as a model to have a conversation to see, what does it tell us? If you were to sit and put yourself in the shoes of each of those parties and think about yourself as them, what is that telling you? And really what it's done is it's raised their awareness of what they thought each person needs in that model is different to the reality. And I think the good thing about using that model, it's created a conversation and a connection with their employees, with the line managers, with their clients about what are your new requirements, what are your needs, how do we balance that out? And I think what's also been quite nice about it is leaders recognizing they don't have to have all of the answers, and they might not actually be the right people to come up with the solutions because of that generational difference and that generational tension, that some of their younger or those that are more open to the more flexible ways of working are more likely to come up with more creative ideas. And the more you involve your people within that, the more you involve a more diverse group of people, and I mean diverse from a gender perspective, the ethnicity, etc., all of the elements of the ED&I spectrum, because we all have different needs, we all have different requirements, and there is no one size fits all. But one client in particular, they used it as to create what's the sell. And they were talking about, okay, well, I want to do the sell to my staff. I don't want to beg them. And that was about understanding that no one part of the model gets to dictate and trump the other. So no one individual gets to trump another individual. So it was about talking to them about, okay, we really want you to come back because it's about the social interaction. It's about collaboration and why that's important for them and their culture and for their client. It's about creating connection with you. I want to understand what your wants and needs are as an individual so that I can understand how I help marry that with what we need as a business and what we need to do for our clients. It's also about creativity and also about their well-being, because we know that from particularly more junior team members where they might be in flat shares or house shares, it's been much more challenging for them sometimes during the pandemic and the lockdown, that they just don't have the same space that maybe you or I might have to have a room to escape to. So it's about that sell. And then the other element that I found that was really important is that it came back to, well, what is the purpose? What is the purpose of me coming to the office? If you're saying, as a more experienced line manager or leader, I want you back because that's just the way I like to work. What they've actually extended that conversation beyond that model is, well, what is the purpose when I'm asking you to come to the office? What is that purpose? And that has been clear around, for one client, it's about having conversations to have good client meetings, client debriefs, project debriefs, team meetings, and then shifting it onto, well, what does it then mean for the individual? It's about career conversations, that type of stuff.
Indeed, I am. But the more I think about it, the more I think actually, as well as that, there's a different dimension to this. So they're almost as different agendas. If I go back to the old world, in a professional services organization, you'd have the most senior person who speaks most, and their opinion has 10 points, and then the medium people who their opinion has 3 points and they speak less, and then the junior people who might get a quarter of a point, and time would be allocated accordingly. And that's all about the work, the material which is being engaged with, and that makes sense. Of course, the most experienced people and the mid-managers need that, and that structures the work. For many people I've worked with over the years, that's the end of it. But now there's this other dimension, which is, and how do you feel about that work, and how do you feel related to it, in which actually listening to people, how they want to execute that work, and how they want to engage with it, is a second dimension, which didn't really need to be there. And in that second dimension, the amount of listening and stuff like that is almost reversed. It's the new people to it who probably need most support to understand, and the person at the top who's most experienced just knows what's going to happen, and knows it's they're going to lose a weekend or whatever it is. I don't know what you think about that. I think that might be part of the disconnect, that the senior guy I was talking to is talking about the work, and the associates I was talking to are not talking about the work at all. They're talking about the attitude, the environment, and the emotional feeling about it, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, again, this comes back to the McKinsey report as well around, they are looking. So if we take a step back, the challenge is, how do you get the two to meet in the middle somewhere? And we know that the younger generations are looking for, and all employees, actually, whatever age you are, to be honest, is looking for that relational versus the transactional leadership. And I think the more senior of leaders, or those that have got the decision-making authority, are really looking at, okay, what have I done historically? I've given a salary increase, I've promoted them, I have given them a new title change because that'll keep them happy, that'll keep them sweet. I'll get them back in and I'll throw that at them. That's not working, it's not sticking anymore, because people are going, well, I'm not interested in that. Actually, what they want their employer to do is simply be interested in them. Because if we think about it, when we went into lockdown and we did this, 360 of everything like this, you were invited your employer into your home and into your life. They got to meet the pets, they got to meet the kids, because the kids were dive bombing in and stuff like that. But what's happening is now that it's that, okay, well, I've done that, I've been interested in you, now I just want to get back to business as usual. And business as usual is, well, actually, I would quite like to continue with that relational element and get to know you and build that. And I've got kind of 3 client examples, actually, that I found that they've all done something slightly different from one another. The first one, actually, because they've got quite a culturally diverse group of people, they've created a policy of, you can work from whichever country you want, country of your choice, for 30 days a year. They've looked at the tax implications of doing that. They're allowing people to book it through their HR system, their holiday authorization system, and they've got a list of countries that are in the red list of, we don't want you to go there for XYZ reasons. So that's complete work where you want, properly work where you want, for up to 30 days a year. Then we've got another client who's actually created what's called work unbound. So they're saying your whole working week, Monday to Sunday, is the working week, and you choose when you want to work and how you want to work and what times of the day that you want to work. And that takes a lot more coordination and a lot more conversation, and it's about trust more than anything else. And so that it means then could be a bit of a game changer from an ED&I perspective, actually, that working parents are not constrained by this 9 to 5 and then having to juggle the kids. They're just saying, we trust you, clients get access to you at different times and at weekends and at evenings, and that works for us as well. And then the third one that was a real surprise to me is a very traditional accounting firm where they dedicated a whole conference to what is the future of our work. What is the future of how we're going to organise ourselves to make sure that this is a place where our people want to come and work. And I spoke at their conference around that, leading back into the new normal, understanding that psychological shift and what's going on in people's heads, the psychology of it. But they had cultural speakers, they sat and looked at their business plan and how that needs to be different from hybrid working. And so for me, the point about your more senior person that you were talking to, it's about making a conscious choice to understand that they have to lead in a different way, because they've got a leadership shadow. How they lead sets the culture of what it is that's going to happen in their environment. And if they don't set the right tone, then people, in my experience and what I've seen, are going to vote with their feet.
Right. So can you tell us a bit more about the McKinsey report you've mentioned, Pauline? Is it useful? Is it
it's called the Great Attrition and the Great Attraction. I think that's exactly, or I might have got it slightly the other way around, but I'll happily share it in a link with you guys so that you can share with the people that are listening. And it's just a nice, short, sweet, but it just what it's kind of demonstrating in that is that it's a cross-section of employers and professional services within that, and white collar workers. And I think the stat that really stood out for me when I read that was that 41% of white collar workers are considering a move, whether it be leaving their employer, career change, stepping back, taking time out. And that's quite a high percentage that I don't think any employer can readily afford. You know, I'm not saying that anyone's attrition has got to that level, but there's a trend that people are making much different, greater decisions for themselves to suit their lives, rather than being concerned about what their employer is going to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I did read this yesterday in preparation for this, and the thing which struck me as well was there's a really useful table in that report which shows what employees expect and value in their organization versus the second up part of the graph is what employers believe that their employees value. And I thought it was fascinating because it really does pinpoint the areas which I guess we need to address and think about. Because and I thought that single piece of data, I thought for me was really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I get this, for me, comes back to the challenge for employers being that employees want a much more individualistic approach. And that places even more greater burden on your middle level, your managers, that cohort that sits below those that are in the decision-making authority. The burden is on them to create that connection, because whilst we all want to be loved and adored by the business, you know, your employees wanting to be, loved by Veran, actually they want a connection with you as the line manager, and that relationship is critical, because the impact that the line manager relationship can have on the success or failure of an individual is huge, and I think it's the biggest cause of a stress for anyone in their day-to-day working life. So I don't think it's impossible to overcome that individualistic approach and really focus on what the individual wants. But it's about how we have that conversation. And then a lady that I've been partnering with this past year, she's a doctor of psychology, and she calls it the dignity in the dialogue. And I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel. We've got lots of things that are already available to us in the HR world of the one-to-one conversations. But those one-to-one conversations need to have purpose. It's the same as, what is the purpose from coming back to the office? What is the purpose of working at home? It's the same about, what is the purpose of these conversations that we want to have with people? How are we going to use check-ins to actually just make sure that they're okay, and not just focus on the task? And it's not having perfunctory conversations. Oh, how are you? Okay, you're fine, let's move on to the task. Using pulse surveys, so mining your HR data, mining your attrition data to say, okay, what are our issues, what are our challenges here, and using pulse surveys to really kind of get down to the bottom of what is going on there. Using the career conversations to really understand is what they're doing and what the employer is asking them to do. Does that align with what they want and their own purpose? So can you get a little bit of more motivation and from them to unleash that extra discretionary effort that people typically offer when you're bothered to be interested in them as individuals? And I just think it's using what's already there, but having greater purpose around it. And I think managers are really going to need their hand-holding by the HR teams to help make that shift to that more empathetic type of leadership, more in tune with the individual and less about the task, and more focused on what it is and how we want them to show up, and offering that support. But as I said, it needs to be a conscious change, and it's almost like flexing a new muscle.
It's interesting though, because people talk a lot about empathetic leadership, but they talk very little about empathetic management. And it's more of a leadership characteristic than a management characteristic, that empathy. So you're almost saying that managers need to move more into that kind of leadership space, where they are thinking about those empathetic conversations, they are thinking about the broader context. And it sounds like, Pauline, from your research, that you're saying that you get more out of it if you don't talk about the work, but talk about the people and conditions. And then, but that's a big change for most businesses where it's all
massively. And particularly professional services. So, managing large groups of people with different needs, different wants, and different asks is not easy. And I'm not going to sit here and saying, everyone, if you just have a really cozy conversation, Joe Bloggs is going to knock it out of the park for you. It's not as simple as that. But what is the alternative? The alternative is, as we said, 41% of white collar workers are looking to potentially leave or move or do something different with their working life. So, there is no option, I think, for businesses to be able to retain the people that they've got and to attract people in the future. It has to be about that connection and, that real shift in culture that's required to achieve that. And I mentioned the servant leadership piece earlier. And actually the accounting firm that I talked about that dedicated their conference, their managing partner talked about, we need to shift to this. I think potentially that might be a wee bit of a step too far for a lot of leaders within professional services environments. But I think it's about understanding what are the simple things that leaders can do differently. And, there's another HBR, Harvard Business Review bit of research I was reading a couple of weeks ago. And they were talking about the role of the manager and understanding, well, how has the role shifted? So it's gone from the power of, I'm the leader, you're here to make me look good, to, well, actually, I'm here to get the best out of all of you so that we can deliver for the business and for our clients so that we all look good, to, I'm no longer here just to oversee your task. I now have to be here to coach you in order to get the best out of you. And I've actually got to do it like this, or I've got to do it as a combination of this and people physically sitting in front of me. And there's a real, I think, investment that's required to help leaders understand what empathetic leadership actually means in their context. It is about them being more agile. It is about them being more flexible. It is about tapping into that EQ side of things, that emotional intelligence, which, whilst people may not naturally have it, it has been proven by other studies that you can be taught it as well. But it's about choosing to dial that up. And I used to say to partners that I worked with, when they said, oh, Pauline, I'm just not a people person, I don't get it. And I'd say, well, that's a bit of a nonsense. He said, how are you with your clients? Oh, I'm wonderful with my clients. I take the time to find out about them. I take the time to find out what their interests are. And I said, okay, so you can do it when you choose to do it. You're just choosing to do it with your clients, but not with your people. And that sometimes help them flick a switch in their heads that, oh, actually, I'm quite good with people. I've just got to make an effort to do it with my team members and not just my clients.
Yeah, it is interesting because it's group. Actually, if I kind of put this in the wider context of the last kind of 10, 15 years, actually, this check, managers have been under a lot of pressure. We had that process re-engineering to the work we were doing all those years ago. Then that's digitalization, moving to the cloud has made a huge difference. And now agile working, so agile, and then of course the COVID and networked working, or whatever the new words for that are. But these are completely all in one direction and vastly accelerated by the COVID crisis. And I guess we should have seen this coming, that people have been talking about that relationship between managers for a long time. It's just that it's been vastly accelerated by COVID.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a few examples out there of kind of different businesses having got on the front foot of this, and they don't sit within professional services, but there's one particularly in financial services, Standard Chartered. They have, they're a wee bit more ahead of the game, in that what they've done is gone, oh, okay, this is all happening and we see this shift. And actually, our cohort of line managers, that middle management, are critical. So they rebadge them to, you're not a leader of getting work done, you're actually a leader of people. They created a development program about nurturing those new leadership skills that we talked about: empathetic leadership, agility, flexibility, emotional intelligence. And they really focused on that and upskilling the massive cohort of middle management, and an accreditation program. And then on top of that development program, they invested in coaching across all of the levels. So they were coaching their managers to be better managers, and they invested in them to actually develop their own coaching skills as well. Because as we know, if you coach someone to deliver for you, actually, you're going to free yourself up in terms of the amount of time that you spend managing and leading your people, because hopefully the individual will be able to come up with the answers themselves. So that's kind of one example in financial services. Then you've got IBM on the tech side. As you would expect, they've used technology to kind of disaggregate some of the elements of the role and take out the mundane, authorization of holidays and the expenses, that type of thing. They've automated all of that. And they've got, chat bots for how to have a difficult conversation, so that they're not, there's things there that are at the touch of a button. But they also then created, similar to the Standard Chartered, personalized digital learning. So it was all about growth behaviors, again, at a touch of a button when the line manager felt they needed it. And I think the thing that is really interesting about them is they changed their metrics. So rather than having the traditional, what did you hit your budget, did you hit your financials, they moved it to people metrics. How engaged are your employees? How is your diversity and inclusion stats? Have you got any regretted attrition? That type of thing. So I think that has been really important for them, and I think that's quite a big thing for people to be thinking about. And then the last one, and then I'll let you speak, apologies Tom, conscious I'm speaking quite a lot here, is that on Telstra, they're a telecoms company, and this is what I think is really interesting, potentially could be a game changer for professional services, is splitting the role. So you would have two people. You would have the person that's in charge of getting the work done and the person that's in charge of the people. And they really heavily invested in their leaders to be able to perform those two different roles. And the critical thing about it is they treated them equally in terms of remuneration, position on the board, their position in the management team, etc. And when I was in my last law firm, that's one of the things that we constantly struggled with. And my challenge to professional services environments is it time for us to recognise that some people are not good at, and never will be good at, managing people, and some are not natural business developers, or they're not good at producers of work. So is it time for us to go, okay, let's split that out and see it as important as the big biller, the person that brings in all of the work. And
really, that's fascinating, Pauline. That really, to that extent, actually splitting it, saying your managers of work and your managers of people.
Yeah.
That is fascinating. That's quite radical. Telstar must have had a major problem to be able to be solved there.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that professional services firms don't do some of this. There must be some out there that are doing it, but I think it's pockets. And as an HR professional, I used to get really frustrated just going, why are we focusing on the same things all of the time? Because we know that the byproduct of really good connection with your employees and having a good conversation with them is you'll get the money, you'll get the profits, you'll get the revenue, that will all flow. But we tend to focus on that first and then worry about the people afterwards. So I think splitting it out could be a really good force for change. And I think the balance of power then would be, well, actually, the employees might have the balance of power as to whether or not they stay or go, but the employers have the balance of power to choose to change the way that they lead and create the culture that they want.
It's very interesting, the Standards Chartered example as well. We were involved with that at an early stage. And obviously, that organisation is totally global and covers countries with very different ways of doing things. And I think it's really fascinating because the journey for managers in different territories and different countries must be very different, because some countries, some cultures are more have a more empathetic management style already embedded, and other countries are much more of a transactional type
yeah,
management.
I mean, I think the way I look at it, that may be so, but we're all human beings at the end of the day, and we're actually not that different. And most of us, if someone bothers to be interested in us personally, take the time to get to know us, invest in us, and show that they want to see us succeed, you're going to release that discretionary effort, that 10-20% more than you naturally would if someone's just focusing on the task. So my challenge would be, absolutely, there will be cultural differences, but look at it on the human level. Try and look at it as much as you can on the individual level, and see if you can balance that individual need with all of the other elements of that model that we talked about. Because most people, when you talk to them on a one-to-one basis about, these are all the things I've got to balance, can you help me balance that? And if you can, then I'll be able to let you have this. Most people are reasonable enough and will accept that. They might not get 100% of what they're asking for, but they might get 70 to 80%, and that's better than nothing, and then that person walking out the door if they don't get anything.
I think it is fascinating. I mean, it's just such a long-term thing, particularly in the UK, where it's often been said now for decades that we don't really train managers. There's no professional approach to training managers and preparing people for a management role, whereas there's loads on the professional track and all that kind of stuff, and learning the next level of skills and all that is done very well. And yet, as you say, quite often people who are good at that part, good at the transactional part, are then thrown into the management part.
Yeah.
And maybe this new change in the balance of power, which we're seeing, means that urgency, which previously we knew but never really bothered doing anything about, actually there's a new urgency to properly train managers and properly understand how management should work.
Yeah, and it's an investment. I appreciate that it's an investment, but all of the studies that I've read, all of the work that I've been doing with clients this past year, and in my professional career of 20 odd plus years, has, in my mind, you do reap the reward when you make that investment, the right type of investment with the right people. And some people, it doesn't work out for whatever reason, and that's okay. You're not going to please everybody all of the time. But I really do think that we are on that precipice. You asked me a question earlier about what's that crystal ball? What will it look like? Will it ever go back? Nobody knows. But what we do know, and all of the studies and the stats that are showing us, that if we don't make a change, a conscious change to work and lead in a different way that the younger generations are expecting, your profitability will suffer, because your competitors will do it, and you will absolutely see a marked difference in terms of the financial performance at basics level. That's just it. If you don't believe in any of the other stuff, just look at it from a pure economics, your profitability. And there are quite a lot of studies out that when we compare these different organizations, because of the flexibility and their ED&I and all of that, they outperform.
Yeah, I mean, it is fascinating, this will it ever go back? I think when we put it into that broader context of this actually being a development over time, the process re-engineering, digitalization, agile, and then the COVID working from home, etc. I do actually see that as the broad trend over the years, which has only been accelerated by the COVID crisis. And therefore, my assumption is that it is something which is going to be long term, if not forever. Yeah. And I do think that's quite fascinating. I kind of think about excuse my bell. I kind of think about the young lawyer sitting at home, working away all hours, and then observing, something. Even the delivery driver has more freedom about their work done out of money, all that kind of stuff. Not, but many other jobs in terms of work-life balance, choosing your hours, being able to, have some autonomy in one's work. It's kind of like, you might have the best paid and the most, most effective career, but in every other way, often you are subjugated compared to other professions and other walks of life.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about what's going to be sustainable at the end. I mean, sustainability is the buzzword at the moment, but what is going to be sustainable for the future? Can we continue to beast, for want of a better term, your junior lawyers, throwing money at them, giving them the titles, giving them the proposal, all that transactional stuff? And that will work for a short period of time. But at the end of the day, when there's no purpose attached to that, when you're not connecting with the individual's purpose, connecting to the employer's purpose and your client's purpose, it will be short-lived and you will just have churn, is my personal view. And yes, I know law firms, accounting firms, or even engineering firms have got a reputation for that type of way of working. But I do think it's changing. Even in the time that I worked within accounting firms and law firms, I've seen a shift that it is about work-life balance. And there are certain firms that go to market with, we won't beast you in the way that maybe, say, stereotypically the US firms do. And you've also then got the challenge of the attraction of in-house, where you tend to get paid a bit better, but you do have more flexibility and more autonomy because they're not a partnership environment. They're more of a corporate, they have a different structure, and they expect their people to have more autonomy and more responsibility and to take ownership. So it just is a different environment. So, time will tell. I think professional services firms are brilliant environments to work in. They're right for the picking for HR people to absolutely have an influence in shaping what that future will look like. And as I said earlier, be that lightning rod to, really impress upon the leaders that this is the time to, and look at what they've actually achieved in the past couple of years, with being, we could never have our work done remotely. Our clients would never accept it. Within 2 weeks, they were up and running and they were doing it. And productivity only went up. It didn't decrease during that time.
Brilliant, Pauline. In summary of everything I've heard today, I mean, you're telling us that it is clear that we have got to do this. We have got to address this relationship, or our businesses are going to not be as successful as they need to be. I think you're also telling me that we need to work out how it's going to work within our own business. The examples you've given are radically different from each other's and seem to be tailored to the particular business needs. And then I think the third thing which I picked up is that actually we all need to do our research. And you've pointed out two things which I think we'll post after the call to all listeners, which are the McKinsey report looking at the gap between expectations and how companies are delivering them, and then the Harvard report, which is equally focusing on that. And then and doing that research, reading those two, I think will get us on a good position to be able to start making our individual plans for addressing this in our companies. So So thank you very much, Pauline, for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
And sharing what were really useful insights into what I suspect is going to continue to be the big story for the rest of this year and beyond. And thank you very much, audience, for joining us this morning. I hope you found it as useful as I have and taken away as many tips as I've written down in my notebook. And we're going to be back next month discussing more topics around the gaps we are seeing as we emerge from the crisis. And I look forward to seeing you all on future events. So Pauline, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed having a conversation with you today, Tom, and good luck everyone with your challenges ahead. And
everyone who's joined us, thank you very much for joining, and we'll speak soon. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now.